But this relationship with our hormones, obviously for girls, one of the differences between boys and girls is at puberty, the hyperactivity in ADHD boys tends to decline, whereas in girls, it tends to come up. So we start to see this risk-taking behavior, and that can show up in things where quite damaging relationships, eating disorders, self-harm, mental health issues, early teenage pregnancy. These kind of risk factors start to come into play. And this is because of the impact of our hormones. So estrogen, as you know, at certain times of the cycle is high. So menstruating women will be going, actually, I'm having quite a good week this week. I'm on it. I'm fine. This is all good. And then estrogen drops off and everything goes down the pan.
Welcome to the Wildflow podcast with me, Charlotte Puanto, certified cycle and feminine embodiment coach and shamanic womb guide. In this podcast, I'll share my wisdom and conversations with powerful change makers, thought leaders, and embodied teachers to invite you to live cyclically in flow with your menstrual cycle instead of fearing it, to heal menstrual shame and normalize womb wisdom and period positivity, and to step into your sovereign magnetic power to create and embody the change you desire to see in your world. Settle in to unleash your wild flow. ADHD is becoming more and more understood as a neurodivergence. However, what is still not being widely recognised is the link between what ADHD looks and feels like for women and girls because of their hormonal cycle. Today's guest, Adele Wimsett, is a women's health practitioner and cyclical living expert with a background of working with children with complex needs and diagnosed with ADHD herself. She is keen to raise awareness about how females are affected by ADHD. Adele has co-authored the book Essential Feminine Wisdom. She's passionate about educating women and girls on how to harness the power of their cyclical nature. From Menarche to Menopause, Adele bridges the woo and the science, supporting women to balance their hormones naturally. And she's passionate about speaking on all things menstrual education. Adele is also a certified First Moon Circle facilitator, and I'm so thankful that she is a mentor on our facilitator training course too. I'm really grateful to Adele that she has come onto this podcast to share her personal journey of discovering and understanding and diagnosing her ADHD, and also for her educating us so we can have more self-awareness and awareness for children and other people around us who may have ADHD or may be diagnosed. So this is really important listening if you're, particularly if you have ADHD or know of somebody who does, but if you're holding space for people as well, to understand these differences and how hormones are really interplaying with so much more than what is just accepted in, mainstream medicine right now. Happy listening. Welcome, Adele, to Wildflow Podcast. How are you today?
Really good, thank you. Lovely to see you.
And you. Let's start off with a cycle check-in, as we always do. So if you have a menstrual cycle at the minute and you want to just share with us whereabouts you are in your cycle and how that's feeling for you today, that would be so good to hear. Thank you.
So I am actually on day 28 and I am feeling a real stillness. I feel really calm and really still and just really ready to be here with you.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's lovely. I'm glad you're feeling like that on day 28.
I know, because I'm usually at this point thinking, oh my God, why have I got that in my diary? But I just feel sometimes, I don't know if you feel this, just when you're on like a transition day, you kind of like, it's almost like ready to I drop in from that head spinning off into, oh, I think she's coming soon. And I think maybe I'm just in that little phase where she's just drawing me into the cave.
Yeah, I love that. I do that as well. I get this kind of like, I really drop into like a winter hibernation kind of phase before I even start bleeding for like maybe even like a day or two. Sometimes if I'm like, and then I'm like, where's my period? If it's not there yet, because I really feel it. I feel like everything's just really dropped. So yeah, I can relate to that. Nice. I am at the opposite pole of the cycle to you. I'm on day 12. And I'm feeling like I've just had the opposite transition from spring just going into summer. And I felt my energy rising, my need for sleep dropping, my appetite changing. And we've just had a really big full moon. I don't know if you felt that, but it completely threw me and my whole house. And lots of other people I know and have spoken to about this as well. So, um, tired, wired, not able to sleep up till way past midnight, just like really struggling to switch off, and then being woken up in the night by little people. Um, so feeling, even though my energy in hormonally is quite buoyant and resilient, I'm feeling a bit tired around the edges, but I feel like my hormones are really starting to surge and it's carrying me through.
It's really interesting what you say about the full moon, because it was a full moon in Aries, right? And I'm a fire sign, so I love the fire of it. And I was saying to you, because I'm based here in the UK, I think there's been a really heavy collective consciousness. There's been so many things going on here. And I actually held a circle where we did a fire burning ceremony and we transmuted a lot of that energy. So I'm actually feeling like I needed that move. I
Mm,
needed to have fire and intensity to help shift some of that.
that's really nice. Yeah, I'm a fire sign as well, but um yeah, it just really it didn't feel good to me at all. Normally I love the full moon and the full moon energy, but this one, and because it was a full moon, and it was conjunct with Chiron, which is the wounded healer, and it represents your sacred wounds from childhood and brings a lot of patterns and experiences and kind of memories and thoughts and all those kind of things up for healing. I really felt that with this full moon. It was really strange just how normally I really enjoy a full moon, but this one just felt really strong and really like a lot was coming up for me and being illuminated, and sort of like feeling quite raw with it as well. So yeah, it was just really interesting knowing, like, learning that about that position as well. And I feel like it's really kind of thrown me off. Yeah, it's been a bit of a big one. So hoping as the moon starts to get a bit darker, I
Settle.
can kind of settle again. Yeah. Hmm. So, well, I'm so excited to chat with you today, Adele. Thank you so much. I think you're amazing, and I love being, with you in the First Moon Circle facilitator training, and you're a mentor there with us now.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's, I just have loved getting to know you this year, particularly. And I'm really glad that you asked if we could have this conversation, because I think it's a really important topic to discuss, which is ADHD and the link between hormones, and ADHD and care and the experience of having menstrual cycles and all of those things. So that's what we're really going to talk about. And I'd love to just ask you to explain to everybody, so we're all just coming at this from the same kind of level of um understanding about just what ADHD is, and yeah, what it means and what it kind of can look like, I guess.
So basically, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, which is a really terrible name for it, because actually our attention can be amazing when we're interested in something. It's for us being able to hook into things that we're not, that it can become a bit of a challenge. So there's a bit of an international discussion around the name of it at the moment, but you may have heard the term ADD. That doesn't exist anymore. ADHD covers three types. There's three subtypes, which is inattentive, combined type, and then hyperactive. So hyperactive, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to really focus on girls, okay? And when I run workshops on ADHD and girls, I try and say, kind of try and forget everything that you think you know about ADHD, because we're really struggling with these old stereotypes of the naughty little boy bouncing around a classroom, which that is just not ADHD. It is sometimes in boys, but when we're looking at it from a female perspective, it's really unhelpful to focus on that, because that isn't most females' experiences, which is why we get lost. And actually, the hyperactive element for us, to have a standalone hyperactive is quite unusual in girls. We tend to be combined type, which is hyperactive and inattentive. And then much more likely to be inattentive, where we really we can be the daydreamer, that's where we kind of get that looking out the window, not interested, or she's just a bit of a dilly daydreamer. And the combined types, so the hyperactivity can start to show up not necessarily as behavior, and I'm going to explain why, but as hyper thought, hyper speech, and maybe like fidgety, rather than like boys may be seen to be running around and bouncing around. And the reason that this presents so differently in girls comes down to gender expectations, gender role expectations that we see within our culture. So, which I will come back to. But basically, ADHD, they don't really know what causes it. We know there's a very strong genetic link. What we do know is it's not bad diet, it's not poor parenting, it's a neurological condition that people have. Yes, trauma and these other factors can really affect how this ADHD shows up and how it's managed, because we can have lots of protective factors in place, but ultimately it's a neurological condition. And our brain just works differently. We see the world differently. And it comes down to something called executive dysfunction. When I heard that, I was like, well, what exactly is this? And basically, it's a part of the brain that is sort of controlled by neurotransmitters. So you've heard of things like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, these things that kind of fire us up and get us motivated and get us into action state. And for some reason, they tend to not work properly. They're dysregulated, in a simple term for us. So when we look at dopamine as kind of being this motivating thing, we might, a neurotypical person might look at something they don't want to do and think, oh, I really don't want to do that, but kind of can get going with it. Whereas someone with ADHD will be staring at the ironing pile, knowing they need to do it, but just cannot do it. So then we get this perception that we're lazy. Okay, so it basically comes down to this thing called executive dysfunction that is dependent on the neurotransmitters. And that's going to be important when we come on to look at how this shows up in women around hormones. But basically, this gender bias exists because from the minute we're born, we know how we're meant to behave as little girls. We get this good girl message sent through to us. So the survival part of our brain says we have to behave a certain way, not to be pushed out of the tribe, right? To survive, we have to behave. And boys have the luxury of, it's boys being boys. Girls don't have that equivalent. So therefore, we learn that in order to be accepted, we have to behave in a certain way. And this is a term we call masking. And it's subconscious. It's not something we're going, I need to pop my mask on and behave this way. We just learn what is expected. So quite often it shows up in girls in perfectionism, emotional dysregulation, so getting really upset about things, feeling it quite often gets misdiagnosed as anxiety, because if you think in their head all the time, we're thinking, how have I got to behave? That's exhausting and massively overstimulating. So it tends not to get picked up in girls until later on. So we get lost. And we know that lack of early identification significantly increases risk for them as they get older. So does that help? Does that explain it?
That explains so much. And when you said throw it all out the window, everything you think you've really kind of turned it on its head in terms of what I thought it was and how it presented and what it was like more for girls. So that's really, really, really fascinating. Thank you so much for explaining that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, much more on what you've got to share. But I'd love to ask you, Adele, as somebody who you have ADHD yourself, could you just share with us a bit about what it's been like for you in terms of discovering your ADHD and kind of like how old you were, I guess, when you found out, and how it's kind of affected you, like knowing, not knowing? We're just interested to know.
Yeah, of course. So I actually look back and I was in Mensa. I had an incredibly high IQ. I achieved a lot academically, although if you look at my IQ compared to my academic outcomes, I should have done a lot better. But I was in a grammar school. I got my A levels. I got my degree. I won an award for my academic research into females. I've published a book. I've got to the top of my career in so many different, I've achieved. If you look at what we look at markers of success, that would be me. And the most common thing I get is people say to me, you haven't got ADHD. So if you take a top tip from this podcast, it would be never tell someone who says they've got ADHD that they haven't, unless you really understand the topic, because it's so invalidating. I do feel like a walking, talking ADHD awareness campaign sometimes, because it's like, actually, no, this is how it shows up. And many women, this is why they don't reach out and get assessments, because we go, oh no, but I don't do all of that stuff. I'm doing well in life. It must just be that I'm having a bad week or I'm having a bad time. So I look back, but I always, on the front of it, presented really well. But I had so many systems that I had subconsciously put in place. Because one of the things is, we forget everything. We always forget. I have got lists on lists on lists. I mean, Charlotte, you've worked with me long enough now to be, I'm like, Charlotte, where's the link for that? What's the date for that? I mean, time conversions literally send me over the edge. And what happens is, we have all these things. So we create all these systems to make life organized for us, so we don't forget things, so we don't miss a beat, so we're not late for things, because we get hyper focused on something. If we're interested, I mean, my child can come up to me with their leg hanging off and I'll be like, oh, can you go see daddy? Because I'm so hyper focused on what I'm doing. That's how, because I'm so interested in it. So, there are, and we can get through. I mean, you put us under pressure to get something done and we will complete something in record time. People are like, how did you do that? So we do have all these superpowers within it. But for me, I think it was having this misunderstood anxiety. I'm not an anxious person. I'm a really confident person, but it was like, it presents as anxiety internally, because I was explaining to you earlier, we have this constant drive, like we should be doing something that exists within us. Yet we could just be sat on the sofa staring at something, because we just can't get that dopamine firing up to get us going. So for me, I achieved outwardly really successfully. Have always been fortunate that I've had careers and work that I love and I'm really passionate about, because we can't do boring things. We just can't. But for me, I only got diagnosed when I was 41, combined type. And it was the most validating experience of my life. Okay. I'd known that I'd had it for about 13 years, but I was like, what's the point? What's the point of getting diagnosed? I've done really well. I'm getting through life. It's fine. But then I started to notice it in my daughters. And actually, for me personally, this isn't everybody's experience. For me, I felt like I needed to go down that road to show them that it was okay, to role model that to them. And I'm so grateful I did, because it has changed so much for me. I now run a support group called ADHDivas on WhatsApp for women with ADHD, or friends of ADHD, or parents with girls or children with ADHD. And it's the most incredible community. And I've learned so much about myself. And I know, just to put this out there, I've had a really positive experience with being diagnosed. I know for some women, they can go through a bit of a grief cycle of looking back and going, oh my gosh, if only somebody had picked this up when I was younger, which is where my passion comes, that we identify this in girls a lot younger. So they don't develop this inner dialogue. And one of the differences that we see with boys and girls is when we're looking at treatment plans, is that with boys, we look at addressing the behavior, and with girls, we look about how she feels about herself. How has she internalized these messages that she's not meeting these gender expectations? In social situations, she might be withdrawn because she's been used to blurting something out impulsively or being too emotional. As ADHD females, we are very often told we are too much of something. You're too loud, you talk too much, you're too opinionated, you're too whatever. And people are really happy to tell us this. They love to tell us what we're too much of. And you receive these messages, and we're incredibly sensitive. We really pick up on nonverbal communication. We intuitively know very quickly what people think about us and judge us. And this feeds this inner narrative where you'll find a lot of women with ADHD who get diagnosed later on have really low self-esteem. um, low belief in themselves, imposter syndrome, because we've received these messages. So I really try to work around saying there are so many gifts that we have. I actually believe it's the world that's wrong. I don't believe it's us. I believe like we live in this really system processy world where everyone's meant to be the same, like in the school system and all of this. And we go, well, that doesn't make sense. We're the rebels, we're the rule challengers. Well, why do I need to do that? And that energy that we have, but it doesn't fit neatly into a box. So that's my experience. It's been very positive for me. Would it have made a difference had I been diagnosed younger? I was a child of the 80s. We knew what we knew, and it just wasn't seen as that. I was such a good girl. I was the little girl that every teacher wanted in our class. It's the same for my children. So I had 30 of you because they don't present a problem generally. Generally, we don't present a problem to the teachers. We present a problem to ourselves.
Oh, wow. I'm really moved by that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience. And I'm really, really glad for you that you've had a really positive time, even though you had that diagnosis, recently and not when you were young. But I'm glad for you that you've not had that experience of, I wish I'd known, because I did wonder whether that's what you would say, if only you had known sooner. So it's really fascinating hearing how those, the girls with ADHD are presenting as, like the really easy children in the classroom. And it's just not what I thought you were going to say. So yeah, I really appreciate you educating, me and no doubt lots of listeners as well. Thank you.
And I think something that's really important to remember, and this, if anyone's interested in finding out more, Dr. Patricia Quinn is an international lead on ADHD with girls, one of them, and she gives a very strong message that doing well at school is not an indicator of not having ADHD. Because I even had a woman in my community recently an adult woman go and have a diagnosis, and the male practitioner said, well, you did well at school, you can't have ADHD. And I, oh my gosh, this is insane. And something I'm really passionate about, and excuse my little feminist rampage here, is this gender bias that we see existing across all medicine. This is acknowledged. This isn't a feminist kind of perspective. It's a fact. There's this massive gender bias. Even lab rats tend to be males. So we know medicine works on the male physiology. Yeah. So the information we have, we just get treated as small men when it comes to treating us. And ADHD massively highlights this. The screening tools, assessment tools, intervention, treatment options are all based on what works for naughty little boys. And ADHD is so much bigger than that. So there is an international awakening at the moment to try and have these tools redesigned to fit with the feminine experience. Because, and this maybe we can lead a little bit into the hormone, if that's okay with you, the hormone part, because these lovely neurotransmitters that we have are actually sensitive to estrogen. So this is why the fluctuations throughout our cycle and these very distinct hormonal phases that women have that men don't have a massive impact on our diagnosis and our traits. So every single ADHD woman will have different traits, really. They'll all be to do with this executive dysfunction, but it will show up differently. So for one, mine is like memory. I will literally come downstairs to come and do something. An hour later, I'm like, why am I down here? This kind of, and people say, well, I do this, I've got a lot of ADHD traits. And I think a really lovely way to say that is everybody needs to go for a wee. But if you're going 10 times in half an hour, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. That's the difference. We can all identify with some of these, but when it's continuously and it affects the quality of your life and how you're perceived as a human, because our traits tend to be misjudged as character flaws, and they're not. And that's where the inner dialogue comes from. But this relationship with our hormones, obviously for girls, one of the differences between boys and girls is at puberty, the hyperactivity in ADHD boys tends to decline, whereas in girls, it tends to come up. So we start to see this risk-taking behavior, and that can show up in things where quite damaging relationships, eating disorders, self-harm, mental health issues, early teenage pregnancy. These kind of risk factors start to come into play. And this is because of the impact of our hormones. So estrogen, as you know, at certain times of the cycle is high. So menstruating women will be going, actually, I'm having quite a good week this week. I'm on it. I'm fine. This is all good. And then estrogen drops off and everything goes down the pan. I'm being really good not to swear on your podcast. That happy filter.
You can swear. You can swear.
It's really good. I'm quite proud of myself. I usually have a mouth like a sailor. And so and then we look around us and it's like, I can't cope. Everything's gone. And it's actually because our estrogen isn't there. And now, interestingly, another layer of complexity with this is our lovely, if we're still ovulating, our progesterone starts to rise in the second half of our cycle. And this, for neurotypical women, it's the keep calm and carry on hormone, right? So this is nice. However, for women who are neurodivergent, and by that, by neurodivergent, I mean sort of fitting into these other categories like ADHD, autism, and a host of others, that progesterone can actually dampen the effect of this estrogen. So I see estrogen and progesterone as like these sister hormones, and estrogen's keeping us going. We're like, this is lovely. And then suddenly progesterone comes in and rains on our parade. And we're like, so we can experience a lot longer PMT type symptoms. So PMT is much more of an issue in neurodivergent women. Women with ADHD are 10 times more likely to experience PMDD, which is extreme PMT. And yet this is all normalized. It isn't linked. I am yet to come across a practitioner who brings in this recognition of the impact of hormones into girls' treatment plans. We also know that estrogen has an impact on medication if people choose to go down a medication route. So actually for girls and women, we might only need to be medicated 2 weeks of the month, whereas actually boys get medicated every single day because their hormones don't fluctuate like ours do. Yet again, when is that taken into consideration? So does that all make sense?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So am I understanding you right that before puberty, you're not really sensing the ADHD in girls so much, but when the hormones come online and the menstrual cycle starts and, in puberty, you're starting to see more of these ADHD kind of behaviors. And then in the first half of the cycle, so when estrogen's rising, it's kind of buffering everything and it's like everything's fine. But once you get into that luteal phase, the premenstrual phase, like after ovulation, you're starting to, the progesterone's rising, and then you're getting more ADHD, like symptoms, and that would be when medication might be needed, for example, but not in the first half.
Flare up. Yeah, you might be okay in the first half. So these traits flare up. And it's like, but by then we think there's something wrong with us because we've got such a loud inner critic. And for neurotypical women, our inner critic gets loud at that phase anyway, right? But for us, she's already loud and telling us we're not good enough as women and females, and I just want to add into this. I'm not saying this is every single ADHD woman's experience. This is just my experience and with the community of women that I work with, a lot of the research and information that is available, of which there isn't enough, these tend to be the indicators of what's going on for us. Then good news, that's kind of puberty. And good news, when we're pregnant, estrogen levels rise. And actually that can be a really beautiful time for ADHD women because we've got them really, supporting our feel-good neurotransmitters. So, that can be a really lovely phase for women. And this is just my personal perspective. I think in the future, we're going to look back and realize a lot of the mental health issues we deal with women are actually hormone imbalances. And I think we're going to move there. We're not there yet. But just to say for women who are ADHD or are undiagnosed ADHD as well, because I would work with a woman who says I've got ADHD, whether she's diagnosed or not, because by the time we've got to that point, we have done so much research and questioned our sanity and done so much that we know that that's what we are. But actually, if they're after pregnancy, our hormones can drop right down. That can be a really vulnerable time for us because those traits can flare up at a time when we're really tired. We're trying to navigate motherhood. So that can be a real time to really be kind and compassionate and supportive of yourself in that time because they've just dropped off.
Would that often get misdiagnosed then as like postpartum depression?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And
That's interesting.
and I think, even outside of ADHD, if you spoke to most frontline practitioners and said, I don't need mental health, I think I'd like to try some HRT, some hormones to help balance that out, they may well look at you like you're an alien, but actually, my personal opinion is that actually perhaps if we supported with a bit of hormone to help the body balance out, that could be more supportive to women during that phase. But that's
So
just
when
my
you say
opinion.
HRT, you mean like the typical HRT that women going through menopause or would be
Yeah,
given?
so actually, when we're looking at hormone replacement, so this is a really controversial topic, and I won't take too much time of it. But the right HRT, taken in the right way by a supportive practitioner, can be an absolute game changer for women. I'm really supportive of Body Identical, and which are plant-based hormones that our body needs. And that's a whole other topic, which I could chat to you about. But I
Mm,
think, we don't need to fear HRT in the way that we've been conditioned to. The most recent cancer journal in May this year showed that there is absolutely no link between HRT and breast cancer. And that has been validated time and time and time again. We need to kind of change this narrative around it. It's not to say there's no risks, but we have to weigh up the risk for us in any decision. I think any kind of use, whether it's contraceptive or HRT for women, is a really difficult decision. There's no, that's the one that I want because there's no risks. It's a
mm.
difficult decision. But I just want to put that to women who kind of that lands for, that is something to explore.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So instead of taking the usual pharmaceutical medications, to consider trying to get access to HRT for ADHD support
Yeah,
treatment.
if it's to do with their cyclical nature and they're noticing these traits,
Yeah.
and that kind of leads quite nicely into perimenopause for women,
Mm,
which interestingly is a time where we are seeing a significant number of women getting an ADHD diagnosis, because quite frankly, the lid comes off.
mm,
That was my experience. We can't mask all these things we've had, all these strategies we subconsciously developed to make us normal and cope in the world. Actually can't do it anymore because our estrogen's declining. Some women don't have that reaction to progesterone. It's just something to be aware of that you can do. um so actually we start to have this, what's wrong with me? I feel like I'm going crazy. What's happening? I'm not coping with life. I'm much more reactive. I'm much more, whatever the trait is for you. And actually they're reaching out and getting diagnosed thanks to incredible social medias like TikTok and Instagram. People going, oh my gosh, this is me.
mm.
And feeling that's been a real support. I'm not a fan of social media all the time, but for that purpose it's been amazing. And actually, I think HRT can play a really important role. I don't believe HRT is a golden ticket for everything at all. It needs to be done with lifestyle changes to optimize your hormone production. But
Mm.
understanding that and having awareness of it can be really supportive for managing your traits if that's the season of life that you're in.
Yeah, fascinating. So on the other side of menopause, when there's no progesterone, there's no estrogen, it's all like really dropped off. What's ADHD like then?
So what's really interesting here, the good news is progesterone doesn't exist anymore.
Mm,
That kind of goes down practically to zero, which just kind of leaves the remaining estrogen to do its job.
mm,
You can find that we level out. We don't have this cycle, do we, hormonally?
mm.
So you've just got the estrogen that you've got is just consistent, really. You can have this, so your traits kind of level out.
Yeah,
So you've
okay.
not got this sort of fluctuation. It's just
Mm,
you've got the estrogen that the body has recalibrated to produce to some degree, and it can be a much, for some women, much more mellow time, but not for all.
amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting. So if somebody's listening and they're like, oh, I either if somebody knows they've got ADHD and but they haven't really noticed a cyclical pattern,
Mm.
um, or they're just kind of suspecting that they might have ADHD and be wondering about trying to get some help. What would you suggest as being a good way to kind of, observe what's going on and try and get help?
So I would say, First of all, if you do want to go down the path of reaching out for diagnosis, please get someone who understands it in women. That would be because so that there's nothing worse than feeling invalidated when you've actually had the courage to reach out and take that step. I'm really happy, like I'm really easy to get hold of on Instagram. I'm really accessible. Just pop me a message if that helps. But what I would say is my top tip for women, and this is when I work with women one-to-one, this is what I teach them to really deep dive into: track your traits against your cycle. I'd always encourage at least 3 months of data, but after the first month, you'll be starting to go, oh my gosh, this is me. And that is really valuable data to take with you to a practitioner who understands women with this and be able to say, look, this is what is happening to me. There's a very clear hormonal link here. These are my traits. So that's kind of indisputable evidence. And then the next step of that journey that I take women on is to then embody that to create an ADHD friendly lifestyle. Okay, so it's like all the beautiful stuff you do, Charlotte, around cyclical living, but combining that with this ADHD awareness and tracking to create a life that works for us.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing. So you're able to help, people can reach out to you or just find somebody who's, local to them. But really hearing that this, cycle charting is like a basic kind of practice, but bringing in the ADHD trait tracking as well, which just makes so much sense, doesn't it? It can be something that's just really simply recorded, like how you're feeling, what's, whether it's how it's feeling for you in that moment and on that cycle day. And I think that that's something that everybody can do. And I love the fact that it's that hard evidence. You've got it written down. You don't need to try and remember it. It's not something that you're going to be questioned on, and in the moment you're going to be like, oh, I can't quite remember. It's, if you've written it down and charted over, like you say, 1 to 3 months or so, then it's all there, and you can just hand that over and say, look, here you go. It's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, understanding those traits. I think the biggest outcome for me with my diagnosis was the self-compassion and kindness I was able to offer myself, and all these things. I'm like, why? So many ADHD women look around at other women and like, how have you got all your shit together? And I've got all these systems in place, and it still feels like, so it can feel so overwhelming just getting the kids out the door to go to school. Like if everyone's got a pair of socks and matching shoes, we're winning at life. It's kind of that. And that's with organization. So I think just being able to go, do you know what, it's just how we live. This is how we live. This is who we are. Like, manage the expectation, because the things that I'm good at, I am really, really good at. And I think it's taking that strengths-based approach at looking at, because if you work with a woman with ADHD or have them in your life, the things that they're interested in, they will know so much about and be able to really offer that. And we feel so deeply, the emotion of being able to empathize and hold that space. So we're amazing women to have in your life. You want us, you need us to bring a bit of fun to the world, to bring a little bit of that activist energy.
Yeah, for sure. And what I've loved about you, Adele, is like your ability to really get shit done. Like you are on it. And when you're, like you say, I've really witnessed in you that passion of like when something sparks you, you get it and you run with it. And you were holding your first moon circles as soon as you'd finished, and taking on like extra passion projects and collaborations, and you've done so much, like you said, in your career, but you've done so much in the time I've known you, and it's such an inspiration to watch. And when you share that's like you're almost your ADHD energy that you're channeling, it's like, wow, this can be, and what you said before, this can be a real superpower, a real gift in many ways.
And I think about also that so much of the advice that is kind of out there around what we should be doing for our self-care, we really struggle to rest. And I'm not saying we don't need to rest, of course we do, but actually sometimes for us it can be better for us to just do something that can actually relax us much more than sitting there. Quite often if I'm in hyper focus mode, my husband will be stuck, because we've got an open plan house, my husband will be like, babe, I think you need to like switch that off now and come here. And I really begrudgingly do it. And I'm sat next to him, and all I'm thinking about is what I haven't finished and what needs to be done. And he knows me so well now. He's like, just go back to your laptop, but actually for me, that's not oh my God, I've got to keep working. It's like, yes, I'm back here, and I complete it. And that sense of satisfaction, because suddenly we're rushed with dopamine, which we don't usually get. It's like, oh, this feels amazing. Is this what normal people feel like?
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah.
So actually for us, I think it's just um, having that real compassion to kind of go, we don't always, it's okay to find our own way to look after ourselves. It might be for us that we do need to sit on a laptop and finish something off, and that feels better to us than laying down trying to do some breathing, because our brain is just in hyper focus mode and can't unhook out of that. And once you've unhooked, then we go, oh, now I can sit here, it's fine, it's done. So just that kind of awareness of our day-to-day life and how it shows up. But track your cycle, track your traits, feel that you have enough information to advocate for yourself, as sadly, like so many things in women's health, and I see this in my bigger work as a women's health practitioner, we have to be armed with my broader work as a women's health practitioner, where we have to be armed with so much information to be heard. We have to be advocates for ourselves, even when usually we're in an overwhelmed, tired, dysregulated state. We have to be the advocate because, hey, patriarchy, but actually I would say arm yourself with as much information as possible and prepare yourself to be your own advocate.
Yeah, I'm sorry it is that way, but I love that there are real tangible ways that we can advocate for ourselves, and the way that you've described the way that people can do that, I think is empowering. And I hope that we are getting closer to what you were saying before about reframing that, the definitions, the tools, all of that, about the understanding of what it's like for girls and people with cycles and hormones, female hormones, as opposed to boys, and the way that they're the same every day. I've just got one more question for you, because I'm just curious, based on how you were describing the hormonal phases around a cycle, and I'm just curious as to whether you've noticed that in terms of like the cycle syncing way, where you might have different strengths or superpowers in each phase of an actual menstrual cycle, whether you've kind of noticed that with ADHD there are particular times in your cycle that are really good for one thing, and then in a different phase, like you find that you're better at other things come to the fore in that kind of cycle syncing approach. That's something you've noticed?
Yeah, so what was interesting is that I started cycle syncing way before I had my diagnosis with ADHD. And even though I was kind of aware that I had it, it's not something I really consciously thought about. So my cycle syncing, I just thought it was normal. All the stuff that how I did things, it's almost like extreme. I feel like with ADHD, it's like extreme things. Like, it's really unusual for me to feel this good and this external and present at this phase of my cycle. Really unusual, because at this point I can really be on my knees, because this is usually the point at which that inner drive I spoke about, suddenly I hit a wall and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need a blanket just to lay here and eat raw chocolate and drink cacao. That's usually the point that I'm at in this phase. And so I feel like I experience it really extremely. And then when I'm in my higher phases, can present as probably quite manic to some people at the time. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I can literally, I'm like a machine. I can go from like 5 a.m. and going and going. And I'm like, and I have this huge capacity for work. I have the ability to process a lot of information very quickly. As long as I have time organized where I'm going to do things and work's going to get completed, because everything I do, I enjoy. I'm interested in everything I do, So what I might do in those phases, if there are bits that I'm not a fan of, like anything admin-y, I'm not a fan of, I'll try and put it in those phases, because I know it won't be quite a chore. But if you've got me in my late luteal phase of trying to do something, I don't know, something that would probably seem quite basic to someone else, I'm literally like, come on, let's gear myself up for this. It will take me ages. It will take so much mental energy that it's just not worth doing it. So it's just, I think I've my extremes are normal to me because it's who I've always been, but to observe me would probably feel more challenging than it does to be me, if that makes sense. It's that extreme, but being able to acknowledge, well, that's just how I work, and actually being able to step in our power and say, I'm really sorry, I can't do that then. I'm really sorry, I can't. And it's interesting because I'm perimenopausal, my cycles have shifted. They've become more irregular. They've become, they've changed. So that makes it more challenging to book things into my diary. But I'm very good at buffering it. So like for today, there's no one else that I need to speak to or see. So actually it's completely buffered and protected for me. If I had been in that, like, right, let's do this, I could just go and lay like a starfish in my front room and recover. It's making sure that we understand that to buffer our energy and conserve our energy, because fatigue is a big thing for us. Even if we're sat still, our brain is going at 100 miles an hour. For example, one of my little girls has inattentive ADHD, and quite often her answer to things will be, I don't know, just something quite simple like, what would you like for breakfast? I don't know. And that's because in her brain there's so many options that she can't, it's like, well, is it going to be this, it's going to be this, it's going to be this. Whereas if I say, would you like X or X, she can do that because it's 2. Whereas if it's like this real open question, her answer will be, I don't know. And that's where you think of them in a classroom, well, what do you mean you don't know? We've presented all this information, and then they're like inside, and then they just go quiet and don't want to put their hands up and don't want to ask things because they're worried that they're going to look silly. So it's just understanding these little bits. Just give us positions of leadership. We always think we're right. We think we're right. We get misunderstood as being bossy. I'm like, no, we're just really good leaders. We're really good leaders. We see really good ways out of things and really creative solutions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Adele. I have learned so much from you, and I'm really grateful for you sharing your experience. And I hope that anyone listening, can if this is you, then support yourself or those around you. And I think, for people who are holding space for other people, particularly, with a menstrual cycle kind of focus lens, because I know a lot of listeners are, then, this is something that we can have that awareness of. And I feel like I can really take that into my toolkit, I guess, as well, and just have that awareness and appreciation, as we're always talking about people's own unique cycle experience, but how there's such a spectrum of what it's like to have a menstrual cycle. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Give me a soapbox and I'll stand on it.
Yeah, please do anytime. Yeah. So where can people find you, Adele, if they do want to come and find your work, or maybe reach out about working with you or get some information?
Yeah, I love working in my feminine. I love collaboration. I believe we all rise together. We all support each other. We've all got our own unique beauty to bring to this world. So I love to collaborate. I love to hear from other women in the work that they're doing. So yeah, Instagram, really. Instagram's the best place for me. If there is anyone who is ADHD and would like to be added to the WhatsApp support group that we run, please reach out to me. I'm really happy to share that. It's a really beautiful space. And quite fun as well, and occasionally a bit ranty. But it's that's another option that's available. But Instagram's probably the best place to get me.
Beautiful. Okay, I'll put your links in the show notes. But you're Harmonize You, aren't you, on Instagram?
Yeah,
Harmonize You. Amazing. Thank you so much, Adele.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, darling.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you're loving this podcast and you'd love to help me spread the wisdom shared, please leave a review or rating, or share this with somebody who you think would love to listen in. I'm really passionate about creating ripples of change and getting this information to more women, girls, and people with a cycle so that they can reclaim their cyclic natures too. And if you'd love to dive in deeper with learning more about how to connect with your cycle and rites of passages, come and join our free Wild Flow Circle community, or choose a course and learn with me on my online learning hub. All the links are in the show notes. And until next time, be well and go with the flow of your cyclic nature.